And they were, in a sense, they had, what's interesting about it is it's one of those few moments in which there are two different legitimating frameworks. And these people are, if you like, bilingual. They learn to be bilingual because they address an audience in a sense, the ideological clothing that is appropriate to that setting. In the same way, people in the hills of Southeast Asia are at least bilingual, often trilingual, sometimes quadrilingual, if that's a word. And they, depending on which markets they go to, they can, in a sense, represent themselves without any sense of strain or inauthenticity in a different cultural milieu. And if you like, powerless people learn these skills a lot better than powerful people because they have to do it to survive every day. It's a good question. It's the big question in a sense. And to start out by conceding you some ground, the better to attack. I don't want to make a generic case for vernaculars. You know, most of the vernaculars, that is to say, things that have not been standardized, if you like, by states, are vernaculars of patriarchy, of oppression, of caste, of inequalities, and so on. So I don't think I would want to make a generic case that vernaculars are to be preferred. And, to concede a little more ground, I would also, I think none of us are complete relativists. There are certain practices that we would not permit even if they were vernacularly sacred, like the burning of widows and things like that. Now, the interesting thing to me is that the standardization that in which your question depends on is the standardization of the nation state. That is to say, all of these units, the nation state is the largest standardized module of governance, if you like, guaranteed by the international system that, you know, aside from Yugoslavia and Bangladesh, you know, the international system works to preserve existing national boundaries, even though they make no sense at all, even though many of the states so defined are on constant intravenous fluids from the international community and have no reason really to exist as a state, either ecologically or ethnically or linguistically or any other way. So it seems to me that even those, the Declaration of Human Rights, like the rights of man, those emancipatory documents of individual, not community, not collective, but individual rights, will always start out on a kind of, if you like, North Atlantic footing. These are realized through the legal frameworks of nation states. Nation states, which I think as a unit of governance has at the very least, I realize there's no other game in town, but nation states have at the very least a pretty sorry record for the abuse of individual dignity and human rights, and the IMF, the World Bank, the UN all have to work through this framework of the nation state. There's no other, whereas we used to live in a world in which there were huge areas of no sovereignty, there were areas of mixed overlapping weak sovereignty in which there was lots of room for maneuver. I actually, not that I have a replacement for it, I think the nation state is a bad idea, and the degree to which one can, abolishing it is completely out of the question, the degree to which one can, in a sense, minimize its hegemonic control over its own territory by forms of federalism, with certain respect for rights, of course, seem to me to be a good idea. I think that the monocrop, same-age forest has actually, by and large, that is, as a practice, it'll be continued as long as it pays well. Right? I mean, that is to say, this is a standardization by firms for whom the bottom line and the rate of profit matter a lot. So if it turns out, I have to be careful here, if it turns out to be ecologically unsound, no problem. If it turns out to be ecologically unsound to the point where the revenue from the trees is much lower than what they expected to have using those practices, they'll change the practices, right? So in that sense, I mean, one of the things that's happened, and believe me, I'm not expert on modern forestry techniques, but it seems to me that what you're getting in the global south is huge eucalyptus forests in which these are trees that are meant to be chipped up and to be made into wood pulp and made into paper. That is their sole function. Sometimes particle board, but largely paper. And therefore, it's a huge project, if you like, standardization, because they only want one kind of wood chip of the same density, of the same fibrous quality, and so on. So they're after a completely uniform product. And to the extent that they can get huge virgin territories to plant to these trees for the first time. I mean, this is, what Karl Marx called primitive accumulation. You, in a sense, the first time you create these forests, you can take advantage of the accumulated soil capital and so on before you get into trouble. And so it seems to me that a tremendous amount of this, the eucalyptus tree is to other forms of deciduous trees like teak and so on, as chicken McNuggets are to a roast chicken, right? That is to say, this is, it's not, it's a kind of protoplasm that can be used as an industrial input to almost anything. It's a very good point that you make. You could say that, in a sense, the Evo Morales indigenous movement is actually coming at an historical time in which it's assisted by worldviews that are receptive. Whereas 30 or 40 years ago, most of the indigenistas in Bolivia felt humiliated by a Creole Ladino culture in which they were dirty natives, etc., etc. And so, in a sense, the assertion of this kind of dignity actually finds, as you say, now in the closet, a kind of a cosmopolitan claim that they can make on behalf of their particular identities. But I think the larger point, which which I hadn't talked about and which I don't know a whole hell of a lot about, is that the question of what's in the wardrobe. That is, when a particular vernacular fails utterly, people lose, if you like, the vocabulary that they have to understand the world. So in the French Revolution, everybody thought that they were reforming feudalism. They wanted lower taxes, they wanted the crown to not be able to make special taxes and so on. And suddenly, I mean, the people who made the French Revolution didn't know they were making the French Revolution. Of course, that was only the term we applied to it much later. But they found themselves having destroyed the aristocracy, the church hegemony, and the monarchy. Well, these were, in a sense, the social categories with which one reasoned in terms of political economy, and they were all gone.